In today's video, we're going to be continuing on with our series of NHL 2017-18 season recaps and 2018 off-season plans. Today's team we're going to discuss is the St. Louis Blues. And that's coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams. So if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, today we're discussing the St. Louis Blues. So we're going to do a recap here of their 17-18 season, talk about some things that went well, some things that didn't go so well, and then we're going to make some plans for how they should proceed in the 2018 offseason here. We'll take a look at their contracts for salary cap reasons and all that, and kind of formulate how they should proceed this summer to make their team better for next season. So let's jump in here to the recap of their 17-18 season. Now they finished with a record of 44, 32, and 6 for 94 points and only missed the playoffs by one measly point. It's a rather disappointing end to the season for the St. Louis Blues. At some points, getting down to the home stretch of the season, they looked like they were going to for sure be a playoff team. And then there's other times when they looked like they were going to for sure not be a playoff team because they kind of had a big yo-yo there of inconsistent play. They were really great at first stretch, and then they were not so great first stretch. They came down to the final game of the year between them and the Colorado Avalanche. They had a back-to-back games that they had to, if they won out, they were in, and they ended up losing the final game to the Avalanche and lost out by 1 point. I know it's quite a way to go out and miss the playoffs. That really sucks for them, but at the same time, you know, that's one game. It was well within their control, and they very well could have made it. So obviously the St. Louis Blues, for the most part, have had some pretty solid regular seasons the last number of years, but they haven't been able to put together a ton of playoff success. And I know the city and this team has been craving for them to go further into playoffs and hopefully at some point here win a championship. And they've yet to be able to deliver. So let's take a look here at some of the key moments of the 2017-18 season for the St. Louis Blues hockey team. Now, obviously, the trade deadline, one big thing that happened this past year was they traded away Paul Stastny. That came as a bit of a surprise, I think, to the team, as well as to a lot of hockey fans like myself. I know we discussed plenty leading into the trade deadline, a lot of players that were likely going to get moved. And Paul Stastny is not a name that was really discussed or came up a whole lot at all. It's really kind of came out of left field here, took me by surprise. But at the same time, I guess their management group kind of felt that the team likely wasn't going to be a playoff team, or if they were, it wasn't going to be able to do much damage in the playoffs. So Paul Stastny, being a pending UFA, making a fairly high salary, they decided why not move him off the books now, so we can have some cap space and hopefully get back and return what we can. So they ended up getting a pretty decent deal from the Winnipeg Jets. Stastny had a great playoff run with them, and of course they got some, I believe it was a draft pick, first round pick that they got for Stastny. So things didn't work out too bad, but I know listening to some of the players being interviewed after that, they definitely seemed to be quite surprised. Didn't see this coming at all. Couple bright spots. Obviously, Vladimir Tarasenko had another good season. He had 33 goals and 33 assists for 66 points. But I think he's still capable of taking it up another notch. I think Tarasenko can easily be a consistent 40 goal scorer. Not sure why he kind of, 33 goals is pretty solid, don't get me wrong, but I think he's capable of doing more. But Tarasenko is still arguably their most dynamic forward. Certainly a player that a lot of people look to kind of lead this team on offensively speaking, at least. Braden Shen had a breakout year, his first year with St. Louis. He seemed to really form a great connection playing with Jaden Schwartz. Schwartz and Shen had great chemistry. Shen ended up with a career high of 28 goals and 70 points. So that was, like I said, his career high is the best season he's had in the NHL. So obviously he's still trajectory upwards as far as what he's capable of. I think he proved that he could be a top center in this league, and putting him on a line with Jaden Schwartz certainly proved to do quite well together. They had a lot of great chemistry. For the most part, the St. Louis Blues back end as well didn't do too badly. I mean, they have a pretty solid decor between Alex Pietrangelo and Parayko and Edmondson. They got some pretty good, solid young D-men there. I mean, Jay Bouwmeester missed a lot of time due to injury as well, so it'll be interesting to see how his future holds and how his health will rebound for sure. I mean, he's been a pretty solid defenseman for them for quite some time, but it will certainly be interesting to see how his health is going into next year for sure. Let's take a look here at how the St. Louis Blues should proceed here this offseason. They do have some interesting players that are UFAs, RFAs, and take a look at their cap space here as well. One of the big UFAs to me is one of the most interesting ones as well around the league is Carter Hutton. Obviously, for the most part, he's been a backup goalie to starter Jake Allen, but there have been stretches where Carter Hutton ended up being the starter and having a lot of playing time for quite a stretch of a period of time due to Jake Allen kind of having some inconsistent play, I guess we could say. I mean, when he's on, he's arguably one of the better goalies in the NHL for sure. But in the last couple of years, he's had some inconsistent times where he's had stretches for games or weeks on end where he's kind of struggled a bit. So hopefully he can rebound and find his game. But right now, Carter Hutton doesn't have a contract beyond next year. He's 32 years of age. He's unrestricted free agent, so he has the option to go anywhere he wants. So it's hard to say. I think the Blues would really like to retain him. It's hard to say, though. I guess it's going to boil down to how he feels he fits in there, and what kind of playing time he's going to be looking for, what kind of money he's looking for in a contract. I mean, arguably he had his greatest season of his career, I think, this year. You could probably say that. He might have been the better of the two goalies overall for the whole season as well. So he certainly deserves a raise. He certainly deserves a bit of term on contract. I would say probably 2 or 3 year term based on his age and how he's performed as a backup goaltender. But I think they'd be wise to retain him. Obviously, at this point in time, if they're going to stick with Jake Allen as their starter, maybe they'll kind of go back to a 1A, 1B situation like they had with Jake when Brian Elliott was there. Obviously, since they traded Elliott, they've tried to hand the reins over to Jake Allen, and he has done well at times, but he's yet to kind of firmly grasp that starting role and have absolutely stick with it all season. Thankfully, Carter Hutton's been there to challenge him. He's been able to step in and play pretty well when Jake has struggled. So be interesting to see what they do with their goaltending, but Carter Hutton is certainly a player that they should really work hard at retaining, in my opinion, for sure. A couple other guys that are UFA, Scotty Upshall and Kyle Brodziak. Hard to say if they'll return or not. I mean, if they've been around for a while on shorter term, lower value deals, but it might be time to move on and let some of their prospects move into the mix. We'll get into the Blues prospects here in just a moment, but they certainly have a lot of interesting prospects. They look like they're ready to make the jump to pro hockey, and if not to the NHL directly. So we'll get into that here in a moment. Now, they have some interesting RFAs as well, one of them being Robbie Fabry, who's been known as quite an offensive player, but he's been really hampered by injuries in the last couple of years. And he's still quite young, but he's had some pretty significant knee injuries. So where he needs a new contract, I mean, I'm sure they're not going to let him just walk away for sure. He was subject to a lot of trade rumors last summer, but then leading into training camp as well. I know it was speculated at one point when they were talking to Ottawa about doing a deal to pick up one of their wingers, that Fabry might have been the guy going back, but then he ended up with that significant injury right in training camp, and nothing ever materialized there. So hard to say if they use him as a trade chip, if he's healthy. Teams may be shying away now after seeing a couple of these major injuries here in the past few years, but certainly an interesting guy to keep your eye on for sure. If he can bounce back regardless of where he plays, he still has a potential to be an offensive player here in the NHL. Now, some other guys to keep your eyes on here, Nikita Soshnikov, who they picked up from Toronto's an RFA. If depending on what they want to do with him, he may very well go back to the KHL. He wants to play in the NHL and he wants to have a regular opportunity. If he doesn't get that, then he's likely going to leave and head back to Russia, in my opinion. You get Dmitry Yaskin, Oscar Sundqvist, Jordan Schmaltz, and Joel Edmondson. Obviously, Edmondson's a key guy, plays a lot of minutes on the back end. Those guys that I just mentioned are all RFAs, needing new contracts. I think it's possible they could retain most of them, if not all. Edmondson obviously is likely going to get a longer term deal. I think his play has justified a little bit more term in his contract than the other guys. But when you put him on the back end, like I said, with Pietrangelo and Parayko, gives him a pretty solid foundation back there on the blue line for sure. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of deal Edmondson gets, but he's definitely going to be re-signed. And I do expect him to get more term than any of the other players who need new contracts. Now, taking a look at their salary cap situation, they certainly have some flexibility. They could go after a big name free agent. Getting Paul Stastny off the books was a big help. They have all the teams that have been rumored to be going hard after John Tavares should he make it to free agency. St. Louis has been mentioned over and over again, and I can certainly see them being interested. It would make a lot of sense that he'd be the type of player they would want. They do have the flexibility to try to make it happen as well. So should he make it to free agency, I would certainly look to the Blues to certainly be making a big pitch to try to bring him over to St. Louis for sure. Looking at their cap situation, though, we have right now there's Vladimir Tarasenko, has 5 more years at $7.5 million. You get Alex Dean, 3 more years at $5.75. Not so fond of that contract anymore. Alex Dean has been a pretty good soldier for the Blues for a long time, but his production is certainly starting to drop as the years go on. Jaden Schwartz still has 3 more years at $5.35. I think that's a pretty good deal myself. Schwartz has proven to be a great player. He has missed time though due to injuries. Key thing for Schwartz is to stay healthy. Braden Schenzel has 2 more years at $5 million after putting up 70 points last year. That looks pretty solid as well for a contract. The other one that's kind of debatable, I guess, is Patrick Berglund. So has 4 more years at $3.85. He's been a guy that's been subject to some trade rumors as well, but nothing's ever really materialized there. So hard to say. They have been rumored to be, like I said, not only looking at Tavares, but bringing in a scoring winger. They could look to do that through free agency or through making some trades, I guess. We'll see what happens here this offseason, but I think they do need to bolster their offense for sure. I mean, really, if they decide to roll with Carter Hutton and Jake Allen, I think they're could be pretty solid in goal, provided that Jake's still, he's still a young goaltender, still has some term on his contract. I think he has the ability to bounce back, and I still think he can be a great goaltender in this league. You throw in a solid backup like Carter Hutton, and theoretically, they should be pretty good between the pipes. Like I mentioned, they have a pretty good D-core as well. They have some solid young guys to kind of anchor things down. And I think the answer up front is they could use another piece or so to add some more of a scoring punch. If Tavares doesn't work out, which is going to be incredibly difficult to do, I mean, it's going to cost a lot of money. We don't even know that he's going to make it to free agency. And if he does, there's going to be a lot of teams lining up to get him. So it's not something they can bank on or going to be easy at all. But I think having another center iceman would be very wise. I mean, if they could look at adding another winger as well, but they definitely need to address their center depth, especially now that Paul Stastny's not there. I mean, they could look at bringing him back if he's willing to accept less money, but I know he's seemed to do quite well in Winnipeg, and I wouldn't be shocked to see if the Jets could figure out a way to keep him. I think it will be quite challenging though on their end with a lot of their younger players that are going to be due raises here in the next year or two. It's going to be tough for them to keep that group together. So they very well may need to shed some salary longer term. So I don't know if that's going to work out. I know the interest would probably be there from both sides. He may end up being a cap casualty in Winnipeg though. And so, could he go back to St. Louis? It's a possibility if he's willing to take less money. But they may opt to go in a different direction and try to find another center iceman to roll with here with their top two lines. I mean, I think Braden Schen's proved that he could be a #1 center. If they look to bring in some wingers, I mean, there's lots of free agent wingers that might fit the mold of what they're looking for. But to get a center iceman outside of Tavares, there's not much on the open market that they could look to sign as a UFA that would really be a #1 or #2 center, in my opinion. So they have to look to do that through trades or into their prospect pool, which we'll get into here now. I mean, the St. Louis Blues have done a terrific job at stacking the prospect pool covered. They've got a lot of guys. Right now, if you're watching the Memorial Cup at all, you can get a glimpse of Robert Thomas playing for the Hamilton Bulldogs. He's a Blues prospect, and he's a tremendous one at that. He very well could end up in the NHL next year. They may opt to put him down in the American League for a little while for some seasoning, but really Robert Thomas is a tremendous center ice prospect. He may not be a #1 center, at least not right away, but I think he could slot in as a #2 or 3. He's a pretty good two-way guy with a great offensive instinct, so he really does a lot of the little things right. So you could look to him. They have Jordan Kyrou, who had a tremendous year in the Ontario Hockey League. Kyrou played at the World Junior Championships for Team Canada this past Christmas as well and did tremendous. He's another offensive talent. Obviously, they have a couple of guys as well that's already seen some limited ice time as well, like Tage Thompson. It'd be interesting to see what he can develop into as well. And don't forget as well, they have Russian player Klim Kostin as well. So they've got some pretty interesting offensive weapons within their forward group that they could insert into their lineup next year. As far as the draft goes this year, 2018 NHL Draft, even though it's a really deep draft, the Blues don't have a first-round pick this year. So they very well may look to make a deal as well to maybe try to bring a first-round pick back. That is quite possible. So again, I wouldn't be completely shocked to see the Blues, if they decide to move anybody off their roster, instead of bringing back another veteran player, they might try to obtain a first-round pick in this year's draft, where it's a deep draft. They can get even somewhere around the middle of the pack. They might be able to get an NHL player within 1 or 2 years. So certainly something to keep your eyes open for. But they do have an excellent group of prospects to work with as well. So they very well might go with youth instead of spending a bunch of money on free agency or trading a bunch of these guys away via trade. So hard to say, but I think the Blues need to add a center iceman, and it couldn't hurt if they added another scoring winger as well. Outside of that, I think we'll probably see them roll with pretty much very similar decor and goaltending. At least that's my take. I think they can bounce back, and they should be able to be a playoff team next year if all goes well for the St. Louis Blues. So if you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 teams. There's plenty of content here for all fan bases of hockey to enjoy. So again, if you're new, I hope you consider subscribing. Please give this video a thumbs up if you like the content as well. I'd really appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We'll catch you next time.